curses.
The Ritualist is one of 2 ascendancies you'll have access to as a Huntress in Dawn of the Hunt. In this video I'm going to be going over this ascendancy, taking a look at exactly what it does and what builds we might see on this class. Let's begin with the single notable branch on the right, Corrupted Lifeforce. Now we do have a good bit of information on this skill as we get to see it in action in the reveal trailer. This appears to be a passive ability that makes blood boils grow on nearby monsters. Then when those monsters are slain, the boils explode, inflicting corrupted blood on nearby monsters. Corrupted blood is a debuff that deals physical damage over time and can stack up to a maximum of 10 stacks. When a new stack is inflicted on an entity, it will refresh the duration of any existing stacks. Importantly, corrupted blood is not bleeding and is not affected by any modifiers to bleeding. Now, the interesting thing about Boil Blood is that it almost exclusively appears to be a skill to aid in map clear and not something that is particularly useful in a bossing setting, unless that boss has frequent adds. There's also the fact that Corrupted Blood is not particularly easy to scale in terms of damage. It deals generic physical damage over time and it's not an ailment. You can't scale it with any ailment stats and it's not considered to be an attack or spell. So as of right now, the Huntress area of the passive tree doesn't really have much in the way of scaling Corrupted Blood. I see this skill as mostly being useful to aid in clearing packs of monsters on a physical or bleed focused build, but I'm not convinced that many Ritualists will take this one. Unless the numbers on it are very overtuned and it's good at clearing rare monsters in the middle of packs. Next up is this 2 notable branch beginning with As the Whispers Ask. Another unique skill, Ritual Sacrifice. This is another skill we get to see in action during the reveal video. So this skill can be used to sacrifice a slain rare monster to gain rare monster modifiers for a duration similar to Headhunter. However, there's one thing that's slightly confusing about the showcase of this skill during the reveal. And this is a really important detail. The difference between these 2 scenarios is huge, and to me it's basically the difference between whether this skill will be used or not. So during the reveal, Jonathan says this.
As the Whispers Ask grants you a new skill, Ritual Sacrifice. Use the skill on the corpses of slain rare monsters to absorb the power in their blood, to give you one of their modifiers for a short time.
However, in the footage, while he's talking, the character clearly goes from having no monster modifiers to gaining 4 monster modifiers from a single rare. And rewinding to earlier in the clip, you can see that the monster originally had 4 monster modifiers. You can even see several of the monster modifiers taking effect on the character after absorbing them, so they are working. For example, the periodic fire AoE around the character, the temporal bubble, and the elemental resistance aura icon. But Jonathan says you will only gain 1 of the rare monster modifiers for a short time, but the clip shows the character gaining all of the rare monster modifiers, so which one is it? This is a huge difference. If the skill allows you to gain all of the rare monster modifiers from a slain rare, it will be quite serviceable. But if it's just a single monster modifier from a rare chosen at random, I don't see it being particularly useful. Now, branching off from that notable is As the Whispers Demand. Ritual Sacrifice can be used on yourself to remove 20% of maximum life to grant a random monster modifier. A maximum of 1 modifier can be granted this way. Now, considering this is the second notable in a branch, this is extremely underwhelming. The fact that you can only gain a single monster modifier this way is kind of crazy, and it's just a random modifier from a huge pool of them. The chances that you get one that's good for your build is very low. With that said, there are some strong modifiers in the pool. Skills firing additional projectiles, Soul Eater, damage as extra, maximum resistances, and life as extra energy shield. There's some really good modifiers in there, but you can only have one of them from the self-sacrifice mechanic. Now, what we don't know is how long this skill's cooldown will be, and if you can reuse it while you have a modifier to replace that modifier with a different one. But even then, does anyone really want to be fishing for a good monster modifier before a boss fight, only for it to be gone 20 seconds later? Okay, let's move on to the second 2 notable branch, beginning with Intricate Sigils. +1 charm slot, 20% more charm charges gained. So this branch is all about charms, and this notable in particular is inherently defensive, allowing you to socket an additional charm to shore up your defenses against an extra ailment or condition. We do know that some unique charms are coming in Dawn of the Hunt, so it's possible there's some interesting options there. The amount of charges you gain from any source will also be boosted. and this is a 20% more multiplier, so it will multiply with any sources of increased charm charge gain that you have, for example from the passive skill tree. Now, the notable branching off of this one is Mind Phylacteries. Can instead consume 25% of maximum mana to trigger charms with insufficient charges. So this node provides an alternative method to proc your charms by utilising your mana instead if those charms are out of charges. The important part of this modifier is that mana is a lot easier to sustain compared to charm charges, especially in specific conditions, such as when you can't kill many monsters in a boss fight. You have your mana flask, you have mana regen, you can get lots of sources of mana recovery. Once used, a charm cannot be reused until its duration expires, so you're unlikely to run into a situation where your charms being used will quickly deplete all of your mana and you're unable to use your skills. However, something important to add here is that this node can potentially permanently maintain a charm during a boss fight as long as you can trigger the activation condition, which may or may not be useful depending on those aforementioned unique charms and if there's any good options there. Otherwise, this branch overall is decent defensively, being able to guarantee that you have a thawing charm to rely on, for example to make sure you're never frozen, is nice, but it is 4 ascendancy points spent. Now we're moving on to another one notable branch, Wildwood Persistence. 5% increased life recovery rate per 5% missing life. Again, an inherently defensive node. I actually really like this one. The lower your life gets from taking damage or spending it with blood magic, the more potent your life recovery becomes. Keep in mind that this is life recovery rate specifically, so it will only affect life recovery over time and not instant life recovery. So this will work for life recovery over time from life flasks, it will work for life regen and leech as long as it's not instant leech, and it will also work for life recharge if you have the Eternal Youth Keystone. It's a nice 2-point branch to make your recovery more effective when you need it most, but this node really only works in a world where monsters aren't dealing obscene amounts of damage, threatening enough to one-shot you. If that's the case, and they've done a decent job of fixing that in the endgame, then this will be a decent notable to pick up. Okay, now we move on to the last and possibly most interesting branch on this ascendancy. This is another 2 notable branch, and interestingly we have 3 options for the small nodes to pass through to reach the first notable, and they're all downsides, and with good reason. You must go through either 30% reduced maximum mana, 25% reduced spirit, or minus 15% to all elemental resistances. And by doing so, you'll reach Unfurled Finger, plus 1 ring slot. An entire new gear slot added to your inventory. That is wild. Rings are pretty powerful in PoE2. You can get a lot of really good stats on these, and there's also a handful of interesting unique options too. On crafted rings, you can get a lot of attributes, resistances, life, and mana. And it will be important when taking this node that you have some powerful rings because of the notable that follows on from this one. But first, we should mention the elephant in the room, Ingenuity. We don't have the patch notes just yet, but I expect that Ingenuity is going to be completely gutted in 0.2.0. I actually think they might completely rework what exactly this belt does, mostly because of this next notable on the Ritualist, Mystic Attunement. 25% increased bonuses gained from equipped rings and amulets. So this is the same modifier that existed on Ingenuity, only that it also affects your amulet slot as well, and it's a much lower magnitude at 25% compared to the 40 to 80% roll on Ingenuity. Now this is extremely strong, and the existence of this notable leads me to believe that Ingenuity, at least in its current completely busted form, is very likely to be gone next patch. I think it will just do something else entirely. And one of the reasons for that is that they'll want this notable on the Ritualist to feel special and unique. Now, something notable here is that this modifier also affects your amulet, which is something Ingenuity didn't do, and this has some interesting implications with unique amulets. For example, Defiance of Destiny's unique modifier will recover 12.5% of missing life before being hit instead of 10%, while the Fire Flower unique amulet will grant an additional fire skill gem level if it has a base modifier roll of 4 levels. Astramentis grants an even more ridiculous amount of attributes, and the Anvil has more maximum block charms, and so on. Of course, there's also crafted amulets which can provide a lot of good stats just like rings, So really, the value of both Unfurled Finger and Mystic Attunement really skyrocket the better gear pieces you have in those slots. However, I do want to briefly mention something about this branch. A while back, I made a feedback video about the illusion of choice in PoE2's Ascendancy design, and this branch right here is another example of that. You are pretty much never taking Unfurled Finger without also taking Mystic Attunement. So that's a bit of a shame to see that style of design continue into the new Ascendancies, but it is what it is. Now overall, the Ritualist is an interesting Ascendancy, but one that I think will be hard carried by the extra ring slot. I don't really see anyone choosing this Ascendancy for anything else. But what types of builds will we see played on the Ritualist? Well, this might be the most open to interpretation Ascendancy that we have in PoE2 right now. It doesn't really have specific offensive nodes aside from Corrupted Lifeforce, and everything else is a bit more generic and allows you a bit more freedom. I expect to see some spear, quarterstaff, and bow builds using the Ritualist, and maybe even some spell builds that path up to the top of the tree. And this Ascendancy is likely to be used as a second or third character reroll in a league when good gear is readily available to make good use of the extra ring slot and the magnitude for rings and amulets. What do you think of the Ritualist? Let me know by commenting below. Thank you to my patrons for your ongoing support, I appreciate you guys. And thank you for watching this video. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.